How often do you study English? How often do you do exercise? How often do you travel abroad? Yes, you guessed it. Today's focus is how to respond to the classic question of how often do you? Well, let's go over the basics of how and when to use adverbs of frequency. And then after that, we'll move on to some really cool expressions of frequency, which personally I use over and over and over and over again. Literally, like every single day. First things first, we tend to use adverbs of frequency using the present simple tense. The reason for this is because it's kind of like a routine. It is something which is repeated, or in the case of never, it is never repeated. So let me show you the most common adverbs of frequency going from 100% of the time to 0% of the time. 100%, always. I always wake up before 8 a.m. I'm an early bird. 90%, usually. Attention with the pronunciation, usually. For example, I usually have toast for breakfast. Coming in at about 80% of the time, we have normally and generally. For example, I normally go to the gym during the week. Next up, we have frequently, which is about 70%. I frequently study French. Then about 60%, we have often or often. It doesn't matter if you pronounce it with a T, often, or without the T, often. Both of them are correct. For example, I often shop online. Now at about 50%, we have sometimes. I sometimes go to the beach. Following that, at maybe 30%, we have occasionally. Occasionally. I occasionally go hiking. Then after that, maybe at 15%, we have hardly ever and rarely. For example, I hardly ever eat meat during the week. Then a little bit less frequent, we have seldom. For example, I seldom read novels. And last but not least, we have never or never ever. For example, I never organize parties. I'm not a party animal. Okay, nice one. Easy peasy. A piece of cake. A walk in the park. But what about the position? Where do we put the adverb of frequency in a sentence? Rule number one is that the adverb of frequency goes before the main verb. I always remember my mum's birthday, for example. Rule number two, the adverbs of frequency always go after the verb to be. I am sometimes late. Rule number three, when we have an auxiliary verb, then the adverb of frequency goes in the middle. But wait, what is an auxiliary verb? For example, have, will, must, might, can. You get the idea. For example, she could occasionally make mistakes. They might never see each other again. Now, be aware, be careful, because as always in English, there are some exceptions. And the following adverbs of frequency can also go right at the beginning of a phrase. So, usually, normally, frequently, occasionally, often, sometimes. All of these adverbs of frequency can also go at the beginning of the phrase. But, however, there are others which can never ever go at the beginning of a phrase, like always, rarely, hardly ever, and never. We never use them at the beginning of the sentence. When there is a negative statement, or above all, a question, instead of using never, we use ever. For example, have you ever visited New Zealand? No, I have never visited New Zealand. That would be positive. Or I haven't ever visited New Zealand. To be honest, a lot of these expressions, these adverbs of frequency, they're quite vague. They're not very specific about the number of times that you have done something. And if somebody asks you the question, how often do you? They want a specific answer. Therefore, we actually also use adverbs of definite frequency. Daily, every day, once a week, twice a month, 4 times per year, every other day. These are some examples of these adverbs of definite frequency in order to be more specific about the number of times that you do something. So let's go back to the first questions that I started this video with, and I'm going to answer them. How often do you study English? Once a day, every single morning. And how often do you do exercise? 3 or 4 times per week. How often do you travel abroad? At least twice a year, but it depends. Now, if you find this video useful, don't forget to subscribe and answer all of these questions in the comments below. Let's move on to the expressions of frequency which I mentioned and promised to you at the beginning of the video. How exciting! Number 1, once in a blue moon. For example, I go to the theatre once in a blue moon. Number 2, every other day. For example, I go for a run every other day. Number 3, now every now and then. I like going to the cinema every now and then. Number 4, every single day. I brush my teeth every single day. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, you get the gist. And finally, number 5, when pigs fly. Do I ever win when I play poker? When pigs fly. It's time for a quick recap test. I'm going to give a synonym or a definition of one of these expressions of frequency, and I want you to think of the expression before I tell you, of course. Number 1, one day yes, one day no. Every other day. Number 2, very rarely, hardly ever. Once in a blue moon. Number 3, never ever, impossible, no way. When pigs fly. Number 4, every day, but more emphatic. Every single day. Number 5, from time to time. Every now and then. You can also say every now and again. It's the same. I believe now it's time for a joke, but remember, hit the subscribe button. Ready? What do you call someone with no body and no nose? Nobody knows. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you enjoyed the expressions at the end, then I recommend that you watch my last video going over 6 expressions to try to sound British. You can click on the link just here. Bye!